by the end of this episode, you'll have a clearer picture of what authentic presence actually costs you when you suppress it, and what becomes possible when you stop doing that. Many speakers talk about authenticity a lot and end up performing some sort of managed, comfortable version of themselves instead of showing up as an authentic version of themselves. And the gap between those two things is where credibility quietly leaks out. Now, as an openly gay man with a public facing business and as a speaker coach who's worked with speakers for over 15 years, I've earned this conversation and I'm in a good position to talk about it from personal experience as well. So, we're going to talk about things like containment, code switching, the discomfort others feel when you stop performing for them, and what living unapologetically actually looks like in practice. Welcome to Professional Speaking, the show for people who are serious about speaking and becoming known, booked, and paid. My name's John Paul, professional speaking coach, keynote speaker, stand-up comedian, and sci-fi nerd, and I'm here as your guide on the journey to a successful and long-lasting speaking career. Now, most of us have learned to edit ourselves for particular rooms and environments that we go into. This is not a concept that is exclusive to people in the LGBTQ plus community. Everyone has some experience of this on some level. But for those of us who have had to manage identity as more of a survival mechanism, the habit perhaps runs a bit deeper and the cost is and has been higher. Now, there is a calculation that we generally make when we go into any new environment, any new situation. And that calculation is this: is it safe to be myself here? Is it safe to openly express who I am and what I'm about? Now, we do all make this to some degree, but sometimes this is like, well, do I let full rip as to my personality quirks, my extroverted nature, my bawdy sense of humor? Maybe not initially. We contain some elements of ourselves until we feel safe enough or secure enough to be able to express those in particular environments. So there are aspects and elements of ourselves that we seal off, that we hide or box away, at least until we feel safe enough to unbox them and share those with others in our community. And that can be a process and a journey of learning to feel comfortable. But we probably have all come across people who seem to be able to march into any environment or situation and be fully themselves, unapologetically. And we may have issue with that. We might think they're brash. We might think they're aggressive or overly assertive or super extrovert. It might make us uncomfortable that they do that. And I think probably one of the reasons why that could happen and probably would happen in many situations is because some part of us wishes that we were able to live as assuredly as that. There is a level of envy in somebody who has a high level of self-assurance and self-confidence to be able to go into any situation. And that does relate to part of what we're talking about, because this is something that affects all levels of confidence. And there are many levels of confidence that we have. Building confidence in certain situations and environments is a process, is a journey that can start to become a bit more confident next time, a bit more confident. It generally isn't a switch getting flicked and suddenly you're confident and fully open and expressing yourself. So usually it is more of an adjustment, an environmental change, that slowly, gradually turning up the dials until you can get to a level of self-expression that you feel is the fullest that you can express yourself in that situation and environment, which even then may not be a full self-expression, because we always do adapt ourselves for the situations we're in. But what exactly are we adapting for? Are we adapting just some aspects of ourselves, some personality quirks or insights that may not be suitable for every situation and perhaps should be contained in professional settings or similarly? Or are we actually suppressing a significant part of our identity because we are concerned about not being accepted or about being excluded, about having some sort of harm come from that or being treated punitively because of it? That these are very real situations that people can face. The containment element itself ends up being a performance. It ends up being exhausting if we're doing it all the time, because every bit of our energy that goes into monitoring your words, your presentation, That's energy that isn't going into your message, into your delivery, into your ability to connect. It might actually be creating a barrier in between you and your ability to connect with your audience because you can't be fully present in that kind of energy when you're having to self-monitor and self-censor the whole time. So we end up doing things like softening the language that we use, deflecting personal questions, not telling stories from our own personal lives and experience, never quite letting the audience all the way in to see the full self, the full picture, always keeping one foot somewhat off the stage, at least metaphorically, because we don't want to give away too much personally. We perhaps worry that we won't be accepted or that we won't be thought well of. And again, not exclusive to people in the LGBTQ plus community. We all have those aspects to us. We all have stories and experiences for our lives that think, I don't know if other people would understand that or accept me for it. Or, if I shared that, what would people think of me? And so many of us will end up staying well away from that, containing all the personal aspects of ourselves to show up as this sort of professional speaker who isn't telling any personal stories, who isn't creating any way in to be able to create engagement and access, even if some people may not be like that. I don't think any speaker's ever got on stage and had 100% of their audience love them. There might be exceptions to that, but generally for a talk, if you've gone to see a particular speaker, you go to see that speaker. But in other talking situations where people haven't come just to see you as a speaker, the chances are that not everyone in the audience, maybe even only 80, 90% of the audience will even like you. They might be indifferent to you, or they might actively dislike you. And it's really about letting that be okay when we're trying to be this sort of bland, likable by everybody and inoffensive to everybody person. We end up becoming boring. We end up becoming uninteresting. We end up becoming impenetrable as well because they don't feel that they can connect to us personally because there is nothing there personal of us for them to connect to. So for speakers, this becomes a credibility problem. You're asking audiences to be present with you and open with you, whilst you yourself are operating behind a wall of glass. And certainly I have done this myself. And I think my first ever presentation, which was actually in front of about 2,000 people. So it was pretty scary, but I don't remember a lot of it because I was very nervous. It was a big blur, but I do know that I was very wary about not sharing any personal information. Other people who were going up on stage at this particular event to talk were sharing stories from their life, from their personal lives, from their lived experience, talking about husbands, wives, partners, and whatever. And I was very wary about doing that because I didn't want to let people into that side of my life thinking, I know a lot of people don't like that. A lot of people won't accept me for that. And so I kept it contained. This isn't the same as when we sometimes have a conversation about curating your stage persona, because that should be about curating authentic elements of yourself, not about curating a character that you are going to be playing on the stage. And so what we're talking about here is it's about putting on a costume, putting on a mask. We talked about the mask of professionalism before on the show. You're stepping into being an imitation of who you think you're supposed to be in that environment, of what that's supposed to look like, what that's supposed to sound like. And all the personal aspects, all the elements that make you you, apart from just what you look like, that's all put away. And we call that professionalism a lot of the time, and it's not. This creates an authenticity gap. It creates a presence gap. And it's the distance between who you tell people you are and who you actually show up as. And audiences can feel it, even if they can't name it, even if they weren't really looking for it. They will sense that there's someone on stage that they can't specifically connect to. Now, I worked my way through various careers and used to be a flight attendant. And that was a very easy environment to be myself as an open gay man and didn't really have to do much calculation there about, am I safe to be myself in this environment? That was pretty easy. And Then going from that into the coaching world full time, there were more calculations that needed to be made. I didn't always feel safe in every situation. Sometimes I would end up working with clients from particular religious backgrounds and beliefs. And obviously, it was never really my purpose as a coach for me to be sharing my personal stories or my whole situation with them on coaching calls. But from the stage and from training rooms, it's a little bit different because most people, heterosexual trainers, would very regularly talk about their wives, husbands, girlfriends, boyfriends openly and without pause, without anyone batting an eyelid. So for a gay male trainer and presenter to start doing that, it does cause some eyelids to bat. And these are things that do end up getting thought of. In one personal development company that I was in, I found out that the owner, the founder of the business, his daughter was gay as well. That I really started to feel, all right, I think they obviously love her and they would defend her to the death. And I felt safe from that. As like any issue that I end up having with a client that maybe relates to that, I would want to work with a gay coach or something like that, or a gay trainer, would have been very swiftly dealt with. And you don't always know that that's going to be the case, that you will be supported in the environments that you go into. You just have to hope a lot of the time. It does change the calculation when you get that new information. But everybody is to some degree has some elements of calculating their safety in a particular environment to express themselves and to express themselves as fully as they can. But this is really whether it's a conscious choice or whether it's more of a survival reflex. Because when it's a reflex, I think this is something that ultimately weakens you. It's softening your language to avoid friction. It's carefully, quietly eroding who you are to be safe and acceptable, to be unexcluded from audiences. Audiences will read that as uncertainty or inauthenticity, even if you intend it as professionalism, even if you're doing it out of nicety and politeness. It's, again, this barrier between them being able to connect with who you are, even if you suspect that the audience might not support who you are. It's a challenge. So in the professional speaking context specifically, stages do reward specificity, conviction, presence, but also your stories, the stories as well. That if we never tell personal stories, if we are hiding our life from our audience in a way that we don't allow any of the stories that we tell to give insight into who we are and to what our lives look like, people can't really relate to us. And we become this kind of speaker that's more of an entity, that is more of a character on stage rather than ourselves. So this isn't a curated persona. This is a different persona because it's not you, it's a costume that you're putting on. We can also end up in the situations where we're constantly hedging our identity or equivocating in our message just to try and keep from anyone being offended or upset or bothered. And that helps nothing. There's not much space for equivocation. There's not much space for hedging and nuance in a lot of stage conversations, a lot of presentations. Now, the cognitive load of self-monitoring is pretty well documented and measurable, and you can certainly look into that more if this is a topic that interests you, but we don't need to go full academic here. The LIDS version is perfectly sufficient. There's definitely been moments for me where I have caught myself code switching on stages, more in the US than perhaps in the UK and Europe, but certainly it has happened. And it does feel like there's a recognition that I don't feel safe to be myself here. That's the first thing that comes off me. It's not an unconscious thing at all. It's not a reflex action. I'm very aware that I do it and I make the choice in the moment. It would be like, no, I can walk around the city of Valencia where I live and hold hands with my husband if I want to and nothing happens. But if I go to travel to other countries, even to the UK where I'm from, and do that, I'm calculating whether I'm safe to do that, whether I'm safe to openly be myself and hold hands with my husband in that environment. And that's a cost. That's a cost. There's a safety cost. You have to take that fear. Well, is it really worth it? Is it worth the potential hassle or harm or grief that might come from just walking down the street holding hands? Two men walking down the street holding hands. Seems crazy, really, but that's the way the world is. There are perhaps other reasons why we might want to still hold hands in that space or still be truly authentic in situations where we may not feel 100% safe, because authentic living isn't just a personal act. It isn't just about what it does for us. It's a social one as well. When we stop performing the managed version of ourselves, when we show up as our true selves, not only are we able to be more present and connected with our audience, but we are tacitly giving permission to people in the audience to do the same, not telling them to do the same. We're just showing up and being true to ourselves, and in doing so, giving them encouragement, showing them that it can be done, and modeling the behavior of showing up as your true, authentic self. So, because you model it for them, it's easier for them to be able to see themselves doing that as well. And ultimately, this is one of the reasons why countries like Spain, where I live, have become more progressive, because these behaviors have been more modeled, they've been more mainstreamed, rather than people saying, oh, we can't have people seeing that. We can't have people seeing gay people because it will turn them gay. Well, which is obviously ridiculous, because it's become so normalized in the society, because it has been modeled. People are much freer to be themselves, to express who they are. It hasn't created more gay or bisexual or transgender people. It's just allowed those who are to be more fully self-expressed and feel safer in the whole country, really. Pretty much the whole of Spain is pretty good and progressive on these sorts of things. Sadly, I know it may not be the case where you are. But the inverse is also true. When we people please, when we contain, when we reinforce the norm that people pleasing is required and that we have to keep everyone happy and not upset people, not rock the boat, manage the status quo, not demonstrate something that's different to the norm, the accepted norm that everyone is used to. When we go along with that, we end up making the room smaller for everybody. So being willing to piss off the people who are not your people is not aggression, it's clarity. And it is generous, because it signals to your people, to your actual people, that there is space for them, safe space for them. They can see somebody who is like them being freely themselves in a public space, or being willing to risk the costs that might come along with that. Somebody being pissed off by your authentic self, your authentic presence, is more information, and it's information about them rather than any kind of judgment about you. So it's worth thinking about that and exploring that, because this is the shadow mechanism. This is the concept of the things that irritate us will often reflect something in ourselves that we haven't fully made peace with. And from my own personal experience, like when I was very first out of the closet as a fresh, young, new gay man, long, long time ago now, I had a bit of an issue with drag queens. Not perhaps not completely uncommon, but didn't really like or feel comfortable around drag queens. Didn't like going to drag shows, and there maybe weren't as many as perhaps there are now, but they did exist, and they have done for a long time in UK culture. And it took a friend to challenge me on that and say, that this was actually my issue. This was me feeling uncomfortable, like some aspect of my masculinity was feeling challenged. Some aspect of how I see myself as a male was feeling threatened by a man who was dressed up as a female and acting as a female, rather than being able to see it as a form of entertainment, self-expression, even empowerment to some degree. I was seeing it more as a representation of my own internalized shame around aspects of my own personality that were more related to my still lingering religious hang-ups at that time than anything else. So it wasn't even about them. It was purely about me and what they and their presence was bringing out for me. So I had to learn the hard way, but I did. And thankfully, I learned quickly as well. And now, of course, I love drag and I think it's a wonderful art form and allows incredible empowerment and self-expression. The being able to step into that sort of persona can be very freeing in that particular art form, allowing you to have experience and say and do things that you might otherwise hold yourself back from doing. can be very liberating for many people, and it can be transformative in some ways. But the point is more the mirror rather than the medium. It's like when things get held up to us and they make us uncomfortable, or when we hold things up that make other people uncomfortable, the issue is within the person who's uncomfortable, within the person who's choosing to be upset or offended. It is ultimately a choice. We're not going out there generally with the intention to upset or offend people or to cause harm and complication, but rather going out there living as your true, authentic self is nothing to be apologized for. But it may bring up things for certain people, especially in these days of culture wars. And I don't really want to get into that whole thing, but your job on stage is not to manage everyone else's comfort, it's to create connection and trust so that real things can be shared and said. And you can't do that effectively, truly, whilst you're performing some kind of version of yourself that's designed not to rock the boat or offend or upset anybody. Now, very early on in the days of the show, I did have the privilege to connect with somebody called Ken Witowski, and Ken has this wonderful community, online community, but I think they have some real life meetings as well for men. I think it has now expanded to women as well, and they have a men's group, a women's group, and sometimes they come together. It's called Metal for anyone who wants to check it out. I think you can go and check out one or two events for free, and I think it's worth doing if you're interested. So what makes it notable isn't that it exists, because there are other networking groups, but there are some specific rules that he holds within the group. So all partners, whether they, well, in the men's group particularly, all wives or girlfriends are to be referred to as partners, regardless of relationship structures. And the same for anyone who is in a gay or bisexual relationship. Husbands and boyfriends are also to be referred to as partners. So everyone refers to their relationship person as a partner. There's also a zero tolerance on sexism, homophobia, transphobia, racism. And if there's any pushback from any of that, it's really because I think a lot of people are used to being able to go into environments and those things have been okay for them. And suddenly you may find yourself in an environment where those things are no longer okay, and where even just something as simple as reinforcing societal norms that ultimately do state that this version of living your life is better than that version of living your life, or you're not the norm, therefore you are different, or even just things that sometimes cause cliques and separations of groups, saying, well, we're going to stick more with the people who are more like us, and so not so much with the people who are less like us. Being put in the situations where those things are being thrown aside to say everyone is to be included here, everyone is to be made welcome and not to feel different or othered in this group, that's very powerful. And even though there might be people who will protest about pronouns and whatever else, the idea of calling somebody by a different name than the one that's on their birth certificate, whatever other nonsense that it gets into, when you go into an environment that has those sorts of things in place, you can't help but feel more welcomed and connected, that everybody is being respected here. Nobody is more special than anyone else. The people who historically have perhaps had more privilege, for want of a better word, than others, are not being given that privilege in this environment. Everybody here is on the same level. And if we have to make language more neutral in order to do that, which is what Ken's done, that's what we're going to do. And that actually does create a psychological safety for those who may not feel so otherwise accepted and welcomed into particular groups. It might still be a little awkward or uncomfortable for some people who perhaps are more adapted to the norms, but it's certainly a more progressive approach to take, and certainly an uncommon one as well, sadly. Hopefully we'll see more of that. But it is important that we have these communities where men can connect with other men. And it's great to have one that's been designed a little bit differently. So these small shifts, they cost nothing and they signal everything. It's not for the sake of political correctness or virtue signaling. It's really about removing the assumptions that would make anyone feel that they were outside of the main group, or that they might not be as fully accepted as other people. And it does work. The problem, generally, the pushback comes from those who are used to having things their way and going into an environment where that no longer holds. To put all the threads together here, what makes this relevant to professional speakers? Because even though Pride Month is the occasion for this episode, the argument itself isn't seasonal. The LGBTQ experience of navigating identity in public life contains lessons about authenticity, resilience, and presence that have direct professional value. Living unapologetically is not the same as just living loudly, making a lot of noise. You don't have to be waving your flag in people's faces, although, good for you if you are. But it does mean making choices about your presence from a place of self-acceptance, less fear of what other people think of you, or whether you are fully accepted in certain situations, and less of a place of managing other people's reactions, but rather just deal with whatever comes along. Because nearly always I find in those situations, we think about the people who do more often go into circumstances and environments as a fully confident version of themselves, owning exactly who they are and being unapologetic for that. It's rare that they will get publicly challenged for that, especially in polite society and in the corporate world as well. Even if conversations may be had more in private about that, which undoubtedly happens, certainly public perception can be very different. So diversity isn't so much a problem to be managed, it's a resource. Different lives, different perspectives, different ways of reading a room. And these are things that the speaking profession and all of us benefit from when more kinds of people show up as their true selves, as their authentic selves. So for speakers specifically, you stepped up onto the platform to say something that was worth saying. And that takes a version of you that has something at stake. Stakes matter. So a version of you that is edited down to the lowest common denominator has nothing at stake. It's not even really you. It's just a caricature of you. The kind of speaker you are when you're fully present versus the kind of speaker you are when you're managing the room is very different. It's a very different experience and one that the audience will spot. So my question for you is not so much whether you support LGBTQ plus rights or not. I hope you do. I make the assumption that most people listening to this will say yes. The question is what you're doing with your own authentic self in the meantime. Where are you still containing yourself? What version of you shows up on stage? And how much of that is genuine communication rather than fear of making the wrong person uncomfortable? The people who are going to be genuinely transformed and moved by your words, by your talks, are not the people that you're currently editing yourself for. They're the people who are waiting to see if you're actually real before they decide to trust you. So living unapologetically isn't something just for a Pride Month aspiration. It should be a professional standard. The stage is not a place for the version of you that everybody's comfortable with, and it never was. Now, I hope that something has hit for you about what we talked about today in terms of authenticity and showing up as a true version of yourself. And more than anything, I hope that it leads you to go and do something about it and do something that's worth talking about. I'm doing a lot of work on positioning at the moment. And if your speaker positioning is something that you need to work on as well, do come and connect with me. I will send you my free positioning tool to help you work on your positioning and invite you along to a position of authority, the event that I'm running very soon, which will be a small online event for those who would like to do some work on making sure that their expert positioning is still relevant and getting them booked and paid. That's it from me. Have a great rest of your Pride Month if you're still celebrating. I will see you next time. Take care.